all around the Bharat Mandapam. So once again, thank you very much for your time this afternoon and for choosing us to have a conversation with. To start off, I would like to introduce John, who will make some opening comments for the World Bank.
So thank you very much, Jeanette. It's a great pleasure to be here speaking to all of you this afternoon. Over the past week, we've heard from a lot of world leaders, tech leaders, experts from across many, many countries about how AI is fundamentally reshaping our world, presenting not just a technological shift, but a structural transformation with profound implications for economies and societies everywhere. For emerging markets and developing economies, as for all economies, AI could be a game changer. Oh, so sorry. That probably helps. I thought the mics were on. For all countries, but especially for emerging markets and developing economies, AI can be a game changer, a unique opportunity to leapfrog long-standing development challenges. It offers clear opportunities to enhance growth and productivity. We recently did some work in South Asia at the World Bank Group to see what sort of impact AI was having on jobs in the region, and we found that approximately 15 or 16% of jobs here have strong complementarity with AI. AI enables people in those jobs to expand their skills and their effectiveness in delivering the products and services that they are trying to provide. It also helps very, very diverse groups of people in many, many different sectors of the economy. It helps farmers to identify pests on their crops, diseases in their crops, and also how to address them. It helps nurses to identify the ailments and illnesses that their patients may be suffering, particularly the ones that they're not very familiar with, but that they can research using appropriate AI applications. It helps financial institutions to understand better the ability of borrowers to take on loans, which of course expands the ability of the borrower to expand his or her business. So there's clearly enormous potential for AI to fill skill gaps in the areas that I mentioned, also in education, in healthcare services, to detect patterns, to generate forecasts, to guide the allocation of public resources, and so on. Of course, at the same time, on the flip side, AI also creates a number of challenges. One of them is there will be some job losses, particularly sort of entry-level jobs that are very much knowledge or document-based, performing relatively rote work that can be taken over by automation. And we're actually seeing this in the World Bank Group. If we went and looked at the types of jobs that we are advertising these days compared to a couple of years ago, and what we found is that layer, sort of at the bottom of the professional classes inside the bank group, there's just fewer of those types of jobs being advertised in the World Bank Group today than there were a few years ago. At the same time, particularly for developing economies and emerging markets, many of them are going to struggle to harness the potential that AI offers because of very basic issues around the foundations for effective AI use. They may not have reliable electricity. We can start with that very basic one. They may not have an internet backbone that's sufficiently strong. People in these countries may not have very, very basic skills of literacy and numeracy that enable them to work effectively with higher end devices. They may need to use very, very basic devices, not even smartphones, and rely on voice communication, asking a question and hearing a response. So there may be struggles of that kind in developing countries and emerging markets. And I'm not even talking about all the governance and regulatory safeguards that can also come into play. So the question, of course, is how can emerging economies, developing markets, harness the potential of AI and avoid the pitfalls? And for us in the World Bank Group, we've been very, very focused recently on basically small AI. Small AI meaning practical, affordable, locally relevant AI that addresses specific problems and also works where connectivity, data, skills, infrastructure are fairly limited. And this is extremely important in countries like India, where all of those conditions can apply, and yet there's tremendous potential for people to to grow their productivity if they have timely access to information of the right kind in their local language, tailored to their specific circumstances. So that's what we are trying to do in South Asia today and across the globe, actually. And this is really about some of the examples that I mentioned earlier, having bespoke applications that help farmers to do very basic investigation of the types of issues that they're facing, using their phone to analyze what's going on, to identify it, to find out how to address it, even to find out who within their local area, in their market space, can help them by providing the tools or the products that are necessary to address whatever they're running into. So India, of course, is a very strong example of what's possible. India has been a leading country in digital innovation for quite some time. After the United States and China, it has the largest, if you like, digital universe in the world today. It's got some very good foundations. There's the digital identity program, as well as the digital payment platform that currently exists. There are lots of Indian firms that are innovating in AI, including in these small AI applications that I've been talking about. And the governments of India have an objective of ensuring that there is AI for all. So they are very, very aware of the challenges that need to be overcome to make AI accessible to a very, very broad spectrum of the population, and not just the very rich that to some extent need assistance the least, right? It's the poorer parts of the country that benefit the most, because they will be leveraging a tool that they are not very familiar with and have not been using that much in the past. So we're working in India, we're working in a lot of different states, Uttar Pradesh, Maharashtra, Kerala, Haryana, Telangana, on some of these different aspects, working with governments to work on the foundational elements, interoperability, making sure that the accessibility is possible, that programs can run offline, as it were, so that people who aren't able to get online all the time can benefit, and so on. And then we're also working with private sector investors who are developing apps. I mean, we're not actually developing many apps ourselves. That's not really in our comparative advantage. Our comparative advantage as the World Bank Group is to do the more advisory work, make sure that the backbone information that's embedded in the application is reliable and trustworthy, because of course that's critical for ensuring successful uptake. But we are helping governments to create the space that enables experimentation in AI sandboxes to develop the different applications that people in this incredibly creative country are coming up with to help people get on with their work and become more productive. I think it's important to recognize that, if we're going to make effective use of this tool, we need both a public facing effort to address the standards and the other issues, the interoperability and so on that I mentioned before, but also a private sector facing effort, because it's the private sector that's actually creating most of these applications that are working, particularly in the small AI area. We're doing a little bit on bigger AI. There's obviously a connection between the two. Big AI can, through computational power, generate new knowledge that can help us to do things that we haven't done so well in the past, much, much better. But for countries like India, translating that into small AI will also be very, very important for uptake. So I'm looking forward to hearing from all the distinguished speakers in this panel about their thoughts on what's happening today in this sector. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John. John spoke about, of course, the use cases for AI, and on the other side of the spectrum, we have the large language models, we have the foundational AI. But no matter where you sit on the spectrum, no matter where your interests lie, innovation never disperses and never diffuses equally. Today on this panel, I hope to unpack what determines whether AI narrows the development gap or whether it widens the development gap. Especially, we are looking to talk about the real world. What should policymakers in the real world think about and keep at the top of their mind as they go ahead preparing policies considering AI? Before I start, just setting the stage, to a man, to a woman, everybody I spoke with who's attended the first AI summit to today, this is, I think, the 4th AI summit being held. The first one was held in the UK. And without exception, all of them made it a point to tell me how the first session was full of fear. It was, oh my God, AI is this terrible technology which is going to steal all our jobs, make us redundant. And when they come to India, they see the hope that technology and AI brings. And that's the spirit of the discussion this afternoon, to figure out how can we balance both of those extremes, hope and concern, and go ahead in a pragmatic, policy-first way to prepare for the real world. So if I could start with you, Ufuk, how do you think about AI, and especially, where do you see areas of creative destruction to foster the innovation that we need?
Thank you very much. So, of course, creative destruction is an important driver of economic growth in the long run. So that's why, it's an interesting question how AI will affect creative destruction in general. Of course, we are at a very early phase of AI, and it's a GPT, and typically, when GPTs are emerging, there's a huge surge of new businesses, and this should not be misleading. I think the main question we should be asking ourselves is, what will happen to the creative destruction in the future? How does the future look like in terms of creative destruction? And I'm a macroeconomist, so that's why I like to look at this with a bird eye view. And I would like to separate advanced economies from emerging or developing economies. So when it comes to advanced economies, there again we need to split the issue into 2 layers. One, the foundational layer, and the other one is the application layer. When we look at the application layer, it's great. The entry barriers are low. Small businesses can do what only large businesses could do in the past, and they can do their accounting, marketing. There are so many opportunities now. The entry cost the entry barrier is low. As a result, this suggests that this is going to be more friendly for creative destruction on the application layer. But then there's also the foundation layer, and I think that's exactly where the bottleneck is. When we look at the foundation layer, there the entry barrier is really, really high, and the compute it's very compute heavy, it's very data heavy, it's very talent heavy. So as a result, this market, at least this layer, is very concentration prone. Of course, it's very early, but normally we have to be concerned about the foundational layer and how things will pan out, because this is the upstream to the application layer, which is downstream to foundation layer. So that's why whatever will happen at the foundation layer will potentially spill over to application layer 2. So that's why I think we need to look at early indicators, but in the interest of time, I don't want to go into the empirical evidence yet. Maybe we can come back in the second layer. When we look at the developing countries, so I think, I agree with Johannes, I think AI is creating fantastic opportunities. So that's why I think it's really important to understand the opportunities as well as the risks for developing countries. And Together with the World Bank, we are working on the World Development Report 2026, which is going to be on AI and development, and these are exactly the issues that we are focusing on. But I think before we go into, into those details, we should ask ourselves one major question. Why was there no entrepreneurship and dynamism before the AI revolution in emerging economies? Why was, when we looked at the firm's life cycle, for instance, why was it not up or out? Why was it not, very competition friendly? Why did the best predictor of firm size in emerging economies or developing economies was the size of the family or the number of male children? These are still lingering issues, and AI is not, will not bring magic unless we understand and fix the business environment in these economies. AI will just create new tools, but at the end of the day, we need to make sure that the business-friendly environment is there for entrepreneurs to come in and exercise their ideas.
Ufuk, and that's a very interesting leaping off point, the real world. And the intention of this panel is to get exactly there. So if I may turn to you, quite literally turn to you, Michael, and ask you about the real world. You're obviously doing a lot of work on the ground. Where do you see the potential for AI to spur gains? And are there any really transformative breakthrough areas that you're looking at right now?
Yes. Thank you. Thanks very much. I don't want to minimize the existence of forces that may widen gaps. I think that if policymakers, primarily at the national level, but also in multilateral development banks, take appropriate actions and make appropriate investments, then I think AI has the potential to substantially narrow some of the gaps. And I think which policy actions to take can be informed by thinking through relevant market failures and relevant government failures. Let me give a concrete example or two. So, private firms have incentives to develop and improve applications of AI that can generate profits. But there are some very important applications of AI for public goods, for example, that will not attract commercial investment commensurate with their needs. And that's an area where I think governments and multilateral development banks can play an important role. And I think some of this very much echoes what you were saying about small models, but also I'll mention the link between the two. So, an obvious example where I think India has been a leader for the world is in the development of digital identity systems. This will enable, as Ufuk was saying, this enables a lot of work by individual entrepreneurs, a lot of other applications. So that's a huge success, and I think multilateral development banks, together with India, can help bring that to many other countries. Let me take another example, one that's not as well known, but picks up on your comment about farmers. So one thing that's critical for farmers, they have to make a bunch of decisions that are weather dependent. When do you plant, for example? What varieties do you use? A drought-resistant variety, another variety. Most farmers don't have access to state-of-the-art weather forecasts around the world. I'm not talking about one country. In low and middle-income countries, they don't have access to that. Now, there's a huge advance. We tend to think of large language models, but obviously AI is pushing science forward, and that includes in weather forecasting. It's really a revolution driven by AI. But weather forecasts are non-rival, they're largely non-excludable. They're the classic definition of a public good. So there's a strong rationale for national governments, in some cases supported by multilateral development banks, to make investments in producing and disseminating AI weather forecasts. Again here, India is a leader. So if you, India in particular, the Indian government distributed forecasts AI weather forecasts to 38 million farmers last year. And the evidence suggests that farmers, both from India, from this particular case, that in area, so I'll say a little bit about last year's monsoon. It came early in Kerala in southern India, but then there was an unexpected delay in the progression. The AI forecasts got that right. That was the only source of information that reached farmers with that. In the areas, we did a survey above that line, and farmers are responding, and they transplant more, they use hybrid seeds more. Evidence from around the world is consistent with this. Farmers respond to these AI weather forecasts. So I think that's one example, but many others, and happy to discuss them in education and traffic enforcement and elsewhere.
Michael, your answer should be read the book.
Okay.
We've spoken about the use cases of India, but setting up digital IDs, of course, is a sovereign decision. It's something India could do unilaterally. When it comes to the large language models, that's not reality. The large language models are concentrated in the US, in China now with DeepSeek. Anu, in a world where you largely have the rules being set by the two large powers, the US and China, arguably there's of course the EU as well, and you've done a lot of work on that. Who sets the AI rules for the global south? Is there even the possibility for the global south to talk about sovereignty?
So I think the global south has the same kind of incentive for their own AI sovereignty, including then regulatory sovereignty, to design the rules that better work for their economies, for their societies, for what the public interest in these jurisdictions calls for. But regulating AI is a really difficult, even for very established bureaucracies. You need to be able to then make sure that it is an innovation-friendly, and yet you at the same time need to be carefully managing the risks for individuals and societies. So even very established regulators like the European Union found it one of the most challenging tasks to come up with the AI Act. So there's probably something to be learned from these jurisdictions that have gone ahead and done the kind of thinking that had then resulted into some of those regulatory frameworks that we have now in place. So if you think about the choices that India has when it looks around, one of them is to think about, okay, how does the EU go about this? The EU follows what I would call a rights-driven approach to regulation. So what is really characterizing this, the first horizontal binding, so economy-wide regulation that the Europeans enacted. It is a regulation that seeks to protect the fundamental rights of individuals, the democratic structures of the society, and that also seeks to ensure a greater distribution of the benefits from AI revolution. So the European approach is very conscious that it wants to also share some of the benefits, so they don't all go to the large developers of these models, but individual users, society at large, smaller companies benefit from AI as well. So there's something I think the Europeans can teach in terms of that regulatory approach, in addition to maybe then some details of how that regulation in the end was constructed. But just one word, India is a formidable economy that doesn't need to take a template and plug it into the economy as such. I think India is in a very good position to take the lessons that serves its needs, yet make the kind of local modification and variations that are more reflecting the distinct priorities of this country.
Anu, before I turn to Iqbal, a quick follow-up question to you. As India makes its own rules, where does the trade-off lie between regulation and innovation?
So this is very interesting because often I am based in the US, but I'm initially from Europe, and these two jurisdictions are described as the US develops technologies and the Europeans regulate those technologies. So in many ways, does India want the innovation path or the regulation path? And I think there are many votes who would go for innovation. But I really would like to debunk this myth that to me it's a false choice to say that the reason we don't see these large language models being developed in Europe is not because there's a GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation. It's not because there is AI Act. So the reason there is a perceived innovation gap between the United States and Europe is, I think, four things. So first, there is no digital single market in Europe. It's very hard for these AI companies to scale across 27 distinct markets. Second, there's no deep, robust capital markets union. 5% of the global venture capital is in Europe, over 50% in the United States. That explains why the US has been able to take much greater steps in developing AI technologies. Third, there are legal frameworks and cultural attitudes to risk-taking. Europeans have some of the most punitive bankruptcy laws in the world. I wouldn't encourage you to replicate that because it's very hard to innovate on the frontier of technological innovation because sometimes you fail, but you need to be then given the second chance. And the fourth, I think that the sort of foundational pillar of the robust US tech ecosystem is that the US has been spectacularly successful in harnessing the global talent that have chosen to come to the US, including many Indian data scientists, engineers who think that US is the place where they can start their companies, scale their companies, fund their companies. US universities can attract them. So the idea that choosing to follow or imitate aspects of the European rights protective regulation would come at the cost of innovation, we need to understand better what drives the technological innovation and whether regulation should be falsely accused as the impediment to innovation, and I don't think that's the case.
Thank you, Anu. Iqbal, turning to you. You're working in an area of the world, South Asia, where what is regulation? What is enforcement? At the risk of sounding like a provocateur, it's the Wild West a little bit. And therefore, we talk a lot in our part of the world about small AI, about targeted AI. My question to you is that what should policymakers keep in mind when designing AI-enabled interventions, especially when it comes to small AI and the targeted use cases?
Yeah, thank you, and thanks to Vijayanta and others for inviting me to this panel. I think the focus, so J-PAL, for those of you who don't know, is a development center that was founded at MIT's economics department. Michael was one of our founding affiliates, with a very, very simple premise, which is we have spent decades and decades of work in development economics and development policy to kind of fight poverty. Can we do better if that action is based on rigorous data and rigorous evidence? And so kind of what are we seeing in terms of the application of all of that to the AI intersecting with development and social good matter? I think the first thing is that we have to keep a laser focus on impact and final outcomes. I'm so heartened that the topic of this summit includes the word impact in it, and I think that is what really sets this apart. And by impact, I often tell social enterprises, NGOs, I sit on the board of some of those, I said, you did not give up careers at high-tech firms, you did not do these degrees from top universities to count the number of downloads and count the number of clicks and count the number of engagement. You did this because you wanted to change the lives of people. You did this because you wanted improvement in health outcomes. You wanted improvements in education outcomes. So are you really measuring the impact of your work in the field, not just in the lab? And I think the gap between what works in the lab and what works in the field is really quite big. And we have 50 years of working with tech in different sectors, whether it is one laptop per child or digital finance, to know that those two things kind of are different. So for instance, randomized evaluations can help you get to that. The second bit is that you have to unpack who benefits from this technology. Oftentimes, average treatment effects. Yes, I applied this AI, I did a randomized evaluation, and I found that this increased the learning outcomes by 0.3 standard deviations. Great, but who did it benefit? If it benefited the top of the class and left the others behind, then that is not what we were set up for. It's a good outcome for those who are at the top of the class, but anyway, schools in many LMICs, including India, are already set up for that. And then the final bit on this, which I always think, to your part about how do we think, how should governments, how should everybody think about is, am I designing for scale or am I designing for just proving my impact? And if you design for scale, then very much like Johanna said earlier, you're thinking about the resilience of the technology, you're thinking, is this the minimum possible technology that I need to do? And at the same time, you're also thinking about, is this a solution chasing a need, or is this a problem that needs a solution? And I can't tell you how many times that goes wrong. I think this is best illustrated by one quick example from Letras. I think there are lots of examples from India, so I'm going to focus on one from Brazil. This context is very similar to India. In Brazil, there is a standardized examination test that every kid has to take in middle school, which affects their decision where they will land up in after that. But as part of that, there is an essay that they have to write. And that essay grading evaluation takes forever. So Letras worked with us and with Google.org to basically design an AI tool, which you simply scan the essay, and then it helps grade the test. Now, what that did is, in one of the poorest districts of Brazil, it moved the ranking of the public schools, not the private schools, so the most vulnerable public schools, all the way from 11th to becoming the second best performing state in just a matter of 2 or 3 years. Phenomenal results, right? But then you start saying, let's unpack this. What was this thing doing? The first thing that they find out is that, a lot of people are like, oh, does this mean that I don't need teachers anymore? No. You still need the teachers. What it replaces is the rote task of the teacher having to correct spelling mistakes, calling you to the room and saying, hey, you forgot your comma, you forgot to capitalize. Instead, AI takes care of all of that, and now the teacher can sit with you in the free time and say, well, how did you set up the structure of this essay? Did you think about this analytically or not? And that's the first insight that comes from evaluation. It frees up the teacher time. Everything that we do in the field ends up adding to teachers' time, adding to the nurses' time, adding to the Anganwadi workers' time. Very few things free up time. So if your AI application can free up the time of the health frontline workers, first of all, that's a winner. The second thing that is really important here was that this is a demand-driven thing, right? Like there was a demand by the kids to improve their essays, there was a demand by the teachers to free up their time, but most importantly, there was a demand by the school districts to show progress. So I think Letras is kind of a great example of how everything comes together if you think about it ahead of time.
Ladies and gentlemen, a topper of India's notoriously difficult civil services exam. So take Iqbal more seriously than you would as just a normal.
Thank you. I thought that was history now.
It's never history in India, Iqbal. Michael, turning to you, almost as equal in accomplishment by winning a Nobel. What risks should multilaterals like the World Bank keep in mind? Or let me rephrase that actually. Is there a risk that multilaterals are moving too slowly relative to the technology?
Right. I think there certainly is. As I noted before, there are certain areas where the private sector is going to move, but there are other areas where they're not going to move quickly, and it's going to be very important for governments and for multilateral development banks and for philanthropy to move. I think there are a number of approaches to this. One way is by encouraging innovation, by setting up institutions like innovation funds, particularly evidence-based, to echo Iqbal, I think evidence-based innovation funds. So I'll give you one example of something that I'm involved in. Development Innovation Ventures, that was initially set up in the US government, but it's now been relaunched independently. It has tiered funding. So there's initially very small grants to pilot new ideas. Then there's somewhat larger grants to rigorously test them, as Iqbal emphasized. And then for those that are most successful, there's funds to help transition them to scale up. I think, why is that important? Well, that's important because if we're thinking about the services that public services, and there are other sectors where this is needed, but there's probably going to be insufficient competition. Private developers are going to come up with innovations, but then if they have to sell them to the government, they're facing a monopsonistic buyer. They're probably not going to get rich doing that. So some support to generate more in that market, generate more entrants in that market will, I think, is very important. It'll also mean that prices will go down and quality will go up when the government does that. Let me give an example of the potential of how we tend to focus on certain examples time after time here. Let me give another example that is something that I doubt many people here are thinking of when they think of AI. One of the things that, traffic safety, and we've all been exposed to traffic in the past few days. Traffic is a real problem, interfering with urbanization, which may drive growth. There are a lot of deaths from traffic. Okay? A lot of citizens around the world have very difficult and painful experiences with traffic enforcement. Well, you can have automated traffic cameras that have the opportunity to improve traffic outcomes, but also improve people's perception of fairness in government. India's moving in this. Let me mention another thing that within traffic safety that's being done. Microsoft Research India developed a program called HAMS. That is for driver's licenses, and it uses AI to test are the drivers are they actually passing their exams. When this was introduced, it's been introduced, I believe, in 56 sites across India. Hundreds of thousands of people have taken tests this way. We took a leaf from Iqbal's book. We followed up we got information from Ola on ratings and the number of drivers who were rated as driving unsafely. That went down 20 to 30% where HAMS had been installed. So, that's something that was developed not by Microsoft's main business, but by Microsoft Research. If we can just create some support for more ideas like that to be developed, to be rigorously tested, that can benefit India, it can benefit the whole world.
We are running out of time. Probably this is one place in India where time is really respected, and we have to end on time. So I had a list of wonderful questions, but if I could now move to a space where we are really giving shorter answers and quick answers, and the deeply, deeply interesting ones about who's winning and who's losing. Michael, if I could start with you, actually. We've seen many promising technologies fail to live up to their promise. How should we think when we are evaluating AI interventions? How should we think about it? What should be the metrics that we use?
Okay. First, model evaluation. So AI companies typically do that part. How good is the model output for specific tasks? Forecasting the weather. Does it do a good job? Does it match your local language well? Second, user impact. Here, I think there's a role both for sort of initial pilots akin to a medical efficacy trial. If you put the work into trying it, does it lead to improvements in outcomes for the users? Second, scalability and usage at scale. That's more like an effectiveness trial in medicine. That it's important to think not just about the tech, but also about the human systems. Are the teachers actually going to use the product, I think, as an example. How can you get the teachers to use the product? And then the fourth area is continuous improvement. You want a system that improves the underlying models. So I think in procurement, we might want to think about requiring continuous A/B tests, publicity about what the impact usage is and impact is, and perhaps even thinking about requiring open access as part of the procurement package.
Thank you, Michael. Iqbal, I want to flip that question to you. Where do you see hype in the promises of AI that you don't think will play out?
Everywhere. I think hype is natural because the technology is exciting. It's a general purpose technology. It's evolving so quickly. The marginal cost of deployment for the next users is very low. It's multimodal. Today you're doing it in text. Tomorrow you're doing it in video. Day after tomorrow you're doing it on audio. Everybody who has a smartphone has it. So I can understand the hype, right? Like where it is coming from. But I think what we really need to do is separate the hype from the reality on the ground. And the reality on the ground is that many of these technologies are not having the final impact that we are having. And I see kind of two, like once again, my job at J-PAL always, sitting at the top is like to say, not worry about one professor's evaluation or one researcher's evaluation, but say, when I connect all these dots, what am I seeing? And I'm seeing two patterns. One is about trust in technology, and the second part is about the reality of the policy world. Let me elaborate quickly on both. Trust in technology. There are studies which found that even if you give doctors and frontline healthcare workers access to diagnostic tools, including radiology tools using AI-enabled prediction of the diseases, oftentimes it doesn't lead to an improvement in results. And when you try and unpack that, even though this technology worked even better than the human intervention in the lab, right? So some of these diagnostic things can work, have better predictability in the lab, but in the field, they end up decreasing. Not only is their efficiency lower, but it lowers the efficiency of the doctors, because we have not trained them enough as to which parts of this thing is suggestion versus this is a required thing to do. How do you adapt that? So this trust in technology, helping people understand that is very important. And the second thing is the enabling mechanism, the world around us. We just assume that just because the technology works, even if it works in the field, the rest of the system will adapt to it. No, you have to adapt the system to the rest of the world. So this example quickly comes from India, where with one particular state government, we try to improve the collection of value-added taxes. It's called GST in India. There is a whole worry about bogus firms that are created to get these GST or value-added tax things. The machine learning algorithm is able to increase the probability of predicting a bogus firm from 38% to 55% in one shot at a very, very low cost. When it came time to scale up this program by the government, they refused to scale it up. Because you think about it, you have taken away the discretion of the human to decide whether they should raid Michael's firm or they should raid Iqbal's firm. That is power, and if you haven't thought through that point, what is the point of technology?
I won't terrify anyone in the room by asking why they didn't want to scale up this tech. But talking about weeding out the bad actors, talking about firm-level decisions, moving on to Ufuk, does the firm-level evidence show productivity gains diffusing evenly across?
So, just going back quickly to the earlier model that I highlighted, I think it's important to understand what's happening at the upstream so that we can then understand where things will be going in the future. And the evidence there, the early signs, is a bit worrying. So first of all, when we look at, for instance, the dynamism or market concentration in the US, it's been market concentration has been increasing since 1980, but in an accelerating way after 2000. So that's the first set of evidence. The second set of evidence comes from how innovative resources are allocated across firms. And when we look at the inventors who are creating the creative destruction and technologies, there's a massive shift towards market incumbents. And when I say incumbents, those firms that have more than 1,000 employees. In around 2000, 50% of employees used to work for incumbent firms. In just 10 years, that shifted to more than 60%, a massive reallocation of innovative resources. And the final piece of evidence, and we are going to release this study next week, we looked at the universities, how AI is impacting universities, and we look at the AI publishing scientists. An AI publishing scientist in academia, the top 1%, used to make around $300,000 in 2000. It went up to $390,000 over 2 decades. Similar people in industry used to make around $550,000. Now it went up to $2 million. And there has been 2 breakpoints. One of them was in 2012. The other one was in 2017. Of course, image processing, and then the foundational model revolution in 2017. The more worrying part about this, which brings me back to the foundational model side of things, is that this created a massive out-migration from academia to industry. And after 2017 especially, when the compute and infrastructure became so important, the target or the destination is large incumbent information companies, which again highlights where things are going in terms of the concentration. And the worrying part also is that when people are moving to industry from academia, their publication record goes down by 50%. They start patenting by 600% more after they move, which means that we are moving from open science to more protected science. Now, spillover is extremely important for creative destruction, for the future of innovation. So that's why, and if we will keep the foundational layer contestable, I think that the fundamental players there will be universities, and keeping universities in a healthy way is extremely important, but there is very little discussion on this, which I think before it gets too late, because once you start buttoning the wrong button, and then the rest will follow wrong as well. So that's why I think we have to have this frank conversation early on in the game, otherwise it might be too late.
Ufuk, what you spoke about boils down to something Iqbal mentioned as well, power. Because power still makes decisions in this world today. So Anu, before I move to the final section of this panel, if I could ask you, if the finance minister of a developing country, let's say India, comes to you and asks you, Anu, how should I think? What would you tell her?
So today, if you think about how much political power, but also geopolitical power is shaping our conversations around AI, it is something where I think each country is now pushed towards greater techno-nationalism, techno-protectionism. AI sovereignty has become almost a sort of uniformly goal for everyone. But I would remind, even when encountering players like the United States and China, that nobody in today's world will be completely sovereign when it comes to AI space. If I just take one layer of the AI stack as an example, what is now driving a lot of the global AI race is this idea that we want to do frontier AI, we want to have these powerful foundation models. That means you need to have a lot of compute. You can't have a lot of compute unless you have access to the highest-end semiconductors. The US is well positioned there. It is hosting the companies like NVIDIA. The US leads in the design of semiconductors. But who is manufacturing them? We really need to think about the role of Taiwan there. But then the Europeans have ASML in the Netherlands that leads in the high-end manufacturing with the equipment needed for manufacturing. But that is dependent on chemicals, where Japan is leading. And the entire supply chain relies on raw materials from China. So ultimately, all these choke points can in principle be weaponized, but that is not ultimately a sustainable strategy. Even President Trump had to walk back some of the export controls to China because Chinese were saying, okay, then the raw materials are not coming your way. So there are the potential ways to weaponize these interdependencies that ultimately make us all poorer. So as a finance minister of India, when approaching other middle powers, the great powers, I think it's good to remind ourselves that ultimately, for this technology to benefit all of us, we need to find a way, even in this today's protectionist environment, to get along and find some ways to collaborate and think about what our collective AI future looks like. And to remind the reminders of the limits of that sovereignty may be one way to begin that conversation.
Easily said than done. Our final section is, of course, the rapid fire round. We all love this in this room. In one sentence, if I could ask all of you, and Johannes, you're not getting away easily. You're going to answer this as well. So in one sentence, if I could ask you, we're sitting in New Delhi 2035. Could you predict one development outcome that will have dramatically improved with the use of AI, and one risk we'll regret not addressing now?
I guess you already know my second answer. I think the concentration, the future of market concentration is something that we should be concerned about, and we might regret not having discussed this sufficiently in 10 years. On what will change in a positive direction, clearly healthcare and education, I think. It's a no-brainer.
Anu?
So first of all, it's so inspiring to hear all the use case examples, whether we talk about traffic or agriculture or education, because I often talk about the risks and the downsides, so it's a really good reminder. I'm personally very excited, especially what happens in the education space, but also in the health space. In terms of the risks, I think one thing that we are not paying attention to, and what I would even call a systemic risk, is the idea that many worry about AI getting almost too smart. But I am more worried about us getting dumber as a humanity. There is a temptation to start skipping steps, outsourcing your thinking and your creativity to these models. And as an educator, when I think about how I will teach my students to use generative AI to enhance but not substitute their capabilities, we would just make a tremendous mistake if we just forewent that hard work, that the beautiful moment of thinking hard problems and creating and investing in our own capabilities. And all that just cannot be so outsourced, because otherwise we don't even know what kind of questions we should be asking the AI going forward.
Michael.
I agree that I agree that there's huge potential in health and education. I think we'll see big improvements in that, but the risk is that the public sector won't adopt these, and therefore the poor won't have access to them. And that's because the public sector, as Iqbal indicated, the government systems and the government workers may not adapt to use these. There's also risks of copycat regulation that are over-focused on certain problems that other countries may be worrying about, but might not be relevant for emerging economies. And then the final risk is that the procurement systems are just set up in such a way that we don't get sufficient competition, we get lock-in, and then we don't and then we just don't wind up with good quality.
Thank you, Michael. The buzzer's down, but I'll take a risk and quickly run through the other two.
Yes. I think I am much more optimistic about the government actually adopting this thing. Whether it is when you call 100, your call is going to get answered very quickly. The PCR van is going to be at your house much faster. The hospitals are able to will be able to link your health records. So I think the government sector productivity is going to improve leapfrogs. The biggest risk, I think, is definitely the labor market. If there was a dial where I could slow down the adaptation and give time to the labor market to catch up, that's my biggest worry. You talked about entry-level jobs. An entry-level coding job might be an entry-level job in the United States. It's the aspirational job that created Gurgaons and Noidas and Mohalis of this country, and those people are going to be running out of jobs very, very quickly. And I think the labor market, whether it is ESI, Provident Fund, gratuity, we are piling on and making it harder and harder to hire labor, when on the other hand, capital is not taxed. We are giving incentives to people to use AI, and we are taxing them through Provident Fund and labor market regulations to hire labor. And I think that is, for me, is the biggest risk, actually.
So I think that for the first time in human history, we may actually have the tools available to enable us to target poverty reduction, poverty elimination initiatives on individuals. And that could be tremendously transforming. But at the same time, I do worry that we will not get the governance right, or we won't be able to make that governance sufficiently robust to prevent abuses.
Thank you very much to all of our panelists and to you for your time and attention once again. I had the very rare fortune of being able to peek into Michael's screen while he was speaking, and I saw all the messy human notes. Our panelists are definitely not outsourcing their thinking anytime soon, and thank God for that. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, she's also on this panel. Hello, we please would request all of you to take this conversation outside. We really need to get the next session started.